what got you into the broadcasting industry and especially wrestling? And two, how do you maintain to continue to keep the balance and even flow that you have? Because I always hear you on Fight TV, and it just sounds like you have a great connection with no matter who your partner is, and it's tough to do when you're constantly having changes with that.
I'll start with the second question first, and I think that's just because the people that we bring in to do commentary are fantastic. And sometimes it's people like Stu Bennett, aka Wade Barrett. Um, you know, he never really had done commentary before he came to do
Yes,
it with us at NWA Power, but we kind of just
I
hit it
love
off, and
him.
I think it's I think we just both have such a high level of a passion for this project and a passion for professional wrestling, I should say, more than anything else. And you could watch some other places out there, maybe Monday Night Raw, for example, and the guy that they have doing Elite, he's doing a fantastic job there. But I feel like that there's maybe a slight disconnect where the level of fandom might not be there. And at the end of the day, the commentator is just a broadcaster who's also an incredibly big fan. Could you imagine, if Howard Cosell didn't like boxing, or
yeah,
Joe Buck wasn't a big fan of football? Doesn't matter how good of a broadcaster you are, you have to be a fan
of course.
first, and then you can be an elevated in
Yeah.
that. So to be able to work with guys, especially the time that I got to work with Jim Cornette, no one is a bigger encyclopedia of professional wrestling than him. And I mean, if anybody listens to his podcast knows all about that. But and so it's always great to have this. And I think what we have right now with our core commentary team, with Tim Storm, Velvet Sky, and myself, I think that we're going to see a lot more of that going forward. We want to bring in some other people, for special things. You have a match and Tyrus is in the ring, so we'll bring in Austin Idol to, be Austin Idol. That'll be interesting. But we've been playing with it and kind of seeing where everything kind of fits. But I think our core team, me and Tim and Velvet, like we just hit it off. And honestly, there's a lot more fun stuff that happens between the matches that a lot of people never get to see unless you come and see it in person and sit near us. And there's a lot of jokes that get made, and it's a real fun time too. And I think that helps too, because it's not all business. We're just having a good time out there. I like to equate it to playing jazz. We're all just we've got our own instruments,
Mhm.
and we're all playing it, and we're all just kind of vibing and finding that rhythm and building a story as it goes along. So it's sort of like that, which I don't know if Billy Corgan would like to equate it that way, being the rock star, but I'm sure he appreciates jazz. I should have jazz conversations with Billy at some point. And as far as what got me into being commentary with pro wrestling, so much of the sport of professional wrestling and everything else that happens in every industry, the biggest and most important thing is showing up. And so if you kind of just show up and you show an interest and you show enthusiasm, it doesn't matter if you go to your local professional wrestling, indie show, or if you go to, a mom and pop store or a mechanic shop, if you're interested in like fixing cars for a living. If you just kind of
Yeah, of
show enthusiasm and interest in stuff,
course.
and you have some amount of skill, someone will eventually give you a shot. And so that's what sort of happened with me is the timing just happened to work out very well. I was, like many people who love the sport of professional wrestling, I was one of those, to quote Jim Cornette, outlaw indie mud show wrestlers that were, back in the day. And, this is, very early internet. So there's not a whole lot of footage, thank God, because I was a bad wrestler, but I still loved it. I still loved it. I still trained. I worked in Los Angeles and neighboring areas and all kinds of things like that. And then eventually what happened is I was working in news, and a friend of mine, Brandon Taylor, who at the time was wrestling as the Hobo and now wrestles as Robert Baines and works for New Japan Pro Wrestling in the back. Todd Kennelly, who was working for Dave Marquez's promotion, Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, he was leaving to go do TNA Impact. And so there was this open position for a commentary spot, and I was a broadcaster. And I'd been out of the ring for a number of years at that point. But my friend Brandon, who was the champ there, said, "Why don't you just come by and try it?" And I was like, "All right, this is one of those things. Let's just show up." So I made the 3.5 hour drive to the venue, and I did some backstage interviews. And the guy who runs that, Dave Marquez, he comes from a broadcast background. And so he took a shining to me. And that was their big show of the year that they call the Red Carpet Rumble, their version of the Royal Rumble. And then the next day, or the next set of tapings was 2 or 3 weeks later, they just sit in the chair. You're doing it. Here you go. Trial by fire. See if you could call it. And so and I was there for a number of years. I was there calling the action with Giant LaQuasto, who's all over. If you watch wrestling on Fight TV, you'll eventually hear his voice because he worked with WWE for a little while, calling 205 and Main Event and places like that. Fantastic guy. Does great stand-up comedy too. Follow him on TikTok.